Since my last video last week, it's been quite an exciting period of time. Lots has happened since I uploaded that recording on Thursday or Friday. The explosion at Heritage, the explosion around Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes, the little Nazi boy, is just getting bigger and bigger, and the fallout is growing and growing. And a lot of dead bodies, are being shot around here, and it doesn't look like it's coming to an end anytime soon. So let's get into it. Today I want to share with you just sort of a timeline of what's going on. I thought it would be helpful. I simply Googled what is the firestorm all about at the Heritage Foundation, and it came back with a pretty reasonable explanation. It's just good to aggregate the information for me to read to you. The firestorm at the Heritage Foundation is a major internal and external controversy over anti-Semitism and the boundaries of conservative discourse, sparked by the organization's president's defense of Tucker Carlson after he interviewed the white nationalist Nick Fuentes. Tucker Carlson interviewed Nick Fuentes last Monday, as we know, and it was hardly a journalistic hardball interview. To me, it looked more like two people on a first date sharing their information with each other about who they are and what they like and things like that. And nobody was giving anybody else any pushback whatsoever. It's really what it looked like to me. And that is just disgusting, because this Nick Fuentes, is a white nationalist. He's a Holocaust denier. He's an anti-Semitic provocateur, as we all know. And quite frankly, Tucker Carlson over the last couple of years, and especially in the last year, has really been letting his mask slip about his anti-Semitism also. So these two guys really just sort of had a love fest last Monday. And the fact that it was a love fest is what has caused a lot of alarm on the right, and even in the center. People that like Tucker and have been following all this were actually quite upset and quite alarmed. And then you had the Heritage Foundation, which of course is one of the conservative right-wing think tanks that's been around since the 70s and is very well known, and at times has been very important and very involved in various political campaigns and presidential administrations. This time around, as we know, the Heritage Foundation and its president, who is the cause of a lot of this right now, by the name of Kevin Roberts, and one of his sidekicks, who is now the head of the OMB, Russell Vogt, created Project 2025, which, quite frankly, I found alarming last year when I read through it. It was not very American as far as I was concerned. Yes, it had conservative values, and I'm not a conservative, but I'm not a liberal either. I'm a centrist. But I didn't like a lot of what I felt was white nationalism in there, and Christian takeover almost within government, which I really believe in the separation of church and state. Yeah, I think it served us well for the last 250 years. We know it's always been a little bit of vacillation, but it served us well, and I don't think that the policy on that should change ever. Right. Meanwhile, what happened was between that interview last Monday and Thursday, there had been a lot of noise and a lot of conversation that that Kevin Roberts was going to come out on Thursday and cut Tucker Carlson loose. And he came out with a 2-minute and I think a 39-second video that ended up being a nuclear bomb to the conservative right. And in this video, he talked about he didn't want to cancel anybody. He didn't even want to cancel Nick Fuentes. He felt that a lot of what Nick Fuentes stands for is abhorrent, but he felt that debate was the proper forum to take care of these things and not cancellation. And as for Tucker, he made it very clear under no circumstances whatsoever was he ever going to cut ties with Tucker. Tucker is a good friend to Heritage and a good friend of Kevin's, and under no circumstances, no matter what happened, was Heritage ever going to cut ties with Tucker. And he drew that line in the sand. And that 2 minutes and 39 seconds, as I said, was a nuclear bomb. And that position about Tucker it just exploded into the world. To try to, Thursday night, of course, was just crazy on X and other platforms. And by Friday morning, you had Kevin come out with a written statement taking Nick Fuentes to task and about how abhorrent all his positions were, all these wonderful things that you would hope that a leader of a organization, conservative or liberal, would take against an anti-Semite, white nationalist who goes around not only haranguing Jews and about Jewish things, but blacks and all sorts of things, and that Jim Crow was a good thing for blacks, and it's just disgusting. Anyway, you would expect that, but what you don't expect is that same man to put on a pedestal a man like Tucker Carlson, who in the last couple of years has really shown us how anti-Semitic he is. And when you watch that interview between the two of them, there was virtually no daylight between the two of them on most of those issues, especially on the anti-Semitic stuff. So I don't understand how Kevin Roberts could feel that with no daylight between these two men, he could trash one and cut one loose, and the other one will never be cut loose under any circumstances. It makes no sense. And rightfully so. After that note on Friday, things blew up even more. And over the weekend, things just kept exploding. It was like one explosion after the other, after the other, after the other. Heritage had started, I think, a year or two ago, a anti-Semitism project called the Esther, I forgot what it's called, Esther something. And it had among its members and trustees and board members and that a number of Jewish people and rabbis and organizations, and also a number of non-Jews, Christians, thinkers, and pastors and things like that, and other people that would be involved in a committee like that to try to stop anti-Semitism across the country and educate people and things like that. Well, here we are on Tuesday night, and by tonight, I know of at least 6 resignations, or probably more by now, 6 resignations of people on that committee. And I'm sure that there'll be more if that organization or that effort even continues out of the Heritage Foundation, if there's enough people there to even keep it going. So it's a mess. Then on top of that, you had Kevin's right-hand man, who let's see if I can find his name. Ryan Newhouse was reassigned last week from being his chief of staff to a senior advisor role. And then as of today, I don't know when it happened, yesterday or today, he resigned from Heritage altogether, and he was Kevin's right-hand man. On top of that, there was a couple other high-profile resignations at Heritage, on top of the resignations from the anti-Semitism committee. And it's just going from bad to worse for Kevin. To top it all off, Kevin did a speech last night at Hillside College, and again talked about how he doesn't like cancel culture and he doesn't want to cancel, although he has a solid track record of canceling anybody on the left he disagrees with or doesn't like. So it's only the cancer culture, and it's only a red line for him if it's somebody on the right. That it doesn't exist for anybody on the left. So as hypocritical as that is, it's not unexpected. And he talked about Nick Fuentes, and he talked about what his real goal was to reach out to these young men that were 30 and under that are seemingly disaffected and would fall for ideology such as Nick Fuentes. The problem is they're falling for Tucker Carlson's ideology too, which quite frankly is not a whole lot different in many areas. And he reiterated last night he's not going to cut Tucker loose, and it's a problem. And again, that just further ignited, further is causing a problem. And now you have the right fighting each other, and you have MAGA fighting each other, and it's a shitstorm. It's a real shitstorm. So I don't know where it's going to go, but I do know that I don't see, after I've been involved with so many boards and committees and everything over my lifetime, I don't see how Kevin survives this or Heritage survives this. Something has to give. And either Heritage, falls apart, which I don't think is going to happen, although anything is possible. I think that the board is going to, either Kevin's going to have to cut Tucker loose, or the board's going to have to cut Kevin loose. If Kevin cuts Tucker loose, then maybe he'll keep his job. If he doesn't, then I think the board's going to cut Kevin loose, because they're not going to allow the Heritage Foundation to fall through the cracks and into the ground and disappear. So I don't see any other alternative resolution for this mess that's going on. All right, moving on, because I want to bring you something else here. Here, Kevin Roberts is facing significant criticism within the conservative movement and from the public for comments he made in defense of Tucker Carlson. Situation is considered worse by critics, but yet another speech, because Roberts' speech last night just widely condemned. It just made it all worse. And then condemnation from conservatives. And one last thing here, and that is that Tucker had made a statement during his interview with the Nazi, talking about Christian Zionists. And he shared with Nick that Christian Zionists were the worst, and he hates them the most, and he can't stand them. And he talked about people like Mike Huckabee, who was the ambassador to Israel, and Karl Rove, and all these people that he had known in his circle back at the Fox days and over the years are now Christian Zionists, and he just couldn't stand them. And he thought that they were anti-American and all this horrible, horrible stuff. And that was during the interview last week, a week ago Monday. So here we are on Monday, last night. Tucker, after the weekend of hell, breaking loose over all of this, realized that he made a mistake, and that he had pissed off a lot of people, and that by calling the Christian Zionists, that he hated them, they were really pissed off and were really going after him. And he went on Dave Smith's podcast last night. Dave Smith, the Mensa genius, stand-up comic, who was on Piers Morgan all the time, who I think was dropped on his head as a baby, and is not very not a bright intellectual, and certainly not the brightest light in a Christmas tree. So, and I think Tucker knew that, and that he could direct the conversation however he wanted, and it would be an easy softball conversation, and it was. But Tucker went on there and apologized and told them he doesn't hate them. He was just angry in the moment, and he rethought it, and he shouldn't have said that, and all of these horrible things. Well, the only reason Tucker is backtracking on that is because he has millions of reasons to backtrack on that. Tucker, I think, realized just how many people were going to abandon him and abandon his podcasts and his streams, and his cash flow was going to take a big hit. And I think that that's really what woke him up, and that's why he's apologizing. I don't think he honestly in his heart has had a change of heart. I think he's had a change of wallet, and that's it. Anyway, I wanted to quickly get through all that stuff, because the one person, and I'm not a big fan of him, is Ben Shapiro. Really did lay this out in a very eloquent way and really defined everything. as it is. And I agree with Ben on some things, but there's a lot of things I don't agree with him on. But I wanted to spend some time with his broadcast yesterday, where he took Tucker to task and Nick Fuentes to task, and the people that are supporting him, because he just finds it offensive and wrong, as I do, and most people should. And he does a really good job. So we're going to run through his interview. We're not going to watch the whole thing. I'm going to skip around a bit, but I would like you to hear it. I think it's really worthwhile.
One topic in depth. That topic is, I think, the most important thing happening in the country. It was a hot topic last week, but I wanted to take some time to really gather my thoughts and speak on it in coherent fashion, holistic fashion. That topic is the fragmentation of the political right. That fragmentation is being caused purposefully by a splinter faction of people led by a young man named Nick Fuentes. They call themselves the Groypers. They are white supremacists. They hate women, Jews, Hindus, many types of Christians, brown people of a wide variety of backgrounds, blacks, America's foreign policy, and America's Constitution. They admire Hitler and Stalin. And that splinter faction is now being facilitated and normalized within the mainstream Republican Party. The main agent in that normalization is Tucker Carlson, who is an intellectual coward, a dishonest interlocutor, and a terrible friend. And Tucker Carlson last week was aided, abetted, celebrated for normalizing Nazism within the Republican Party by the mainstay organization of the traditional right, the Heritage Foundation. Now, before we explain what's been happening, let's make one thing clear. This is not about free speech or cancellation. It was never about free speech or cancellation. Free speech has a definition: the right to speak free of governmental coercion. I believe in it, of course. I've always defended it. Criticism of bad speech is, in fact, just a form of free speech. Cancellation also has a definition: the banning of particular people, including people like Nick Fuentes, from platforms like X or Facebook. I believe that Nick Fuentes is odious and despicable, but I've never called for his cancellation. And in fact, I've called for his restoration to those services, despite the fact that I think he's odious and despicable. It is not cancellation to draw moral lines between viewpoints. In fact, we used to call that one of the key aspects of conservatism. It is not cancellation to refuse to signal boost Hitler's supporters like Nick Fuentes. It is not cancellation to criticize Tucker Carlson for rhetorically fluffing Nick Fuentes and other anti-American crackpots. It's not cancellation if you urge others to stop promoting those who rhetorically fluff Nazi apologists. Those are all elements of free speech. And anyone who says differently is lying to you, and lying for the most cynical reasons, to misdirect from their own defense of those Nazi apologists and their promoters. The issue here isn't that Tucker Carlson had Nick Fuentes on his show last week. He has every right to do that, of course. The issue here is that Tucker Carlson decided to normalize and fluff Nick Fuentes, and that the Heritage Foundation then decided to robustly defend that performance. Those who criticize both Tucker and Heritage aren't canceling. They are quite properly drawing a moral line. So, for those who don't understand what's going on, let's begin with Nick Fuentes. Now, as I mentioned, last week, Tucker Carlson had on Nick Fuentes. Fuentes is a 27-year-old man who's dubbed himself the leader of a movement called the Groypers. He has a large audience of alienated young white men in particular, and he's earned increased media attention over the course of the past few years, especially over the last year. Now, from Tucker Carlson's interview, you might have gathered that Fuentes has some borderline views on race, a peculiar obsession with what he calls organized Jewry, and a rather sad relationship with the female sex. But probably you came away thinking that, for the most part, Fuentes lives on the radical edge of normality. You think that if you watch the interview, because Tucker Carlson decided that it was important not only to host Fuentes, but to smooth over his views, water them down, and make them far more palatable to a normal audience. As we'll discuss in a bit, this is what Tucker Carlson does for a living. But back to Nick Fuentes. To understand just what Tucker did here, we must actually examine what Nick Fuentes says on his show and has said for almost a decade, because he was asked precisely 0 questions about any of what you're about to see by Tucker Carlson. Nick Fuentes says women want to be raped.
A lot of women want to be raped. And when I say raped, I mean like, that sounds bad when I say it like that. But there's like a lot of women that really want a guy to beat the shit out of them. But also they have to pretend, but part of it is they have to pretend like they don't.
Nick Fuentes says that his followers should kill, rape, and die in his name.
Raise your right hand. All right, everybody raise your right hand. Raise your right hand. Repeat after me. I will kill, rape, and die for Nicholas J. Fuentes.
Nick Fuentes
making political decisions. I'm not attacking women. I'm attacking whores. You have no problems, right? I'm attacking whores. I'm attacking sluts. Stupid, dirty bitches.
Nick Fuentes says that Jim Crow was actually better for black people.
It was better for them too, number one, but number two, who cares? Who cares? You know, enough with the Jim Crow stuff. Who cares? Oh, they had to drink out of a different water fountain. Big fucking deal. Oh no, they had to go to a different school. Their water fountain in that famous picture was worse. Who cares? Grow up, drink out of the fucking water fountain. It's water, it's the same. You know, and you know, even if it was bad, who cares? Who cares? It's better. It's better in general. We all agree it was better for them. It's better for us. Better in general.
Nick Fuentes says that white people are justified in being racist. The Jews start all the wars, that perfidious Jews in positions of power ought to be killed, and says the Jews are filth who have to be removed from the country.
And once again, remember who is responsible for it all. The Jews. They are responsible for every war in the world. It's not even debatable at this point.
So, that right there is just a brief glimpse into the twisted mind of Nick Fuentes. And there's plenty more where that came from, of course. Hours of it per day, in fact. And there's no doubt that Nick Fuentes has a lot of play these days. That's because the left, by moving into a politics of anti-white, anti-Christian, anti-male identitarianism, created its bizarro mirror image, a white pseudo-Christian incel identitarian movement dedicated to destroying the institutions of this country and replacing Americanism with something else. Nick Fuentes' philosophy is not fully formed. It's an incoherent stew of malignity. But that's where Tucker Carlson enters the story. Now, since his exit from Fox News in 2023, when, of course, he was a very, very popular host, Tucker Carlson has turned himself into a conspiracist and a crank and a pathological liar. Tucker excuses Vladimir Putin's murderous and barbarous reign. He has even become one of his most ardent defenders.
It is so much nicer than any city in my country. I had no idea. My father spent a lot of time there in the 80s when he worked for the US government and barely had electricity. And now it is so much cleaner and safer and prettier aesthetically. It's architecture, it's food, it's service, than any country, city in the United States that you have to, and this is non-ideological. How did that happen? How did that happen? And at a certain point, I don't think the average person cares as much about abstractions as about the concrete reality of his life. And if you can't use your subway, for example, as many people are afraid to in New York City because it's too dangerous, you have to sort of wonder, like, isn't that the ultimate measure of leadership? And that's true, by the way, it's radicalizing for an American.
By the way, Vladimir Putin was so amused by Tucker Carlson's easy questioning that he actually mocked him. Tucker Carlson has massaged the Iranian dictatorship and admitted to not asking any difficult questions of the president of that dictatorship.
The interview is limited by a couple of factors. One, it was done by remote through a translator. That's always awkward. For another, I don't speak Persian. And there are all kinds of questions that I didn't ask the president of Iran, particularly questions to which I knew I could not get an honest answer, such as, was your nuclear program totally disabled by the bombing campaign by the U.S. government a week and a half ago? There's no chance he's going to answer that question honestly. I didn't bother to ask.
To kill Americans by the hundreds of thousands.
Why are we so opposed to Nicolas Maduro? So if you ask someone on the street, random person, why are we against Nicolas Maduro? The answer you're going to get is, who's Nicolas Maduro? But if you find someone in South Florida, for example, who knows who Nicolas Maduro is, who can identify where Venezuela is on a map, that person will almost certainly say, well, because he's a communist or a socialist. He's exceedingly left-wing, and that is true. Nicolas Maduro and his government are very left-wing on economics, not on social policy, by the way, which is kind of interesting. In Venezuela, gay marriage is banned, abortion is banned, sex changes for transgenderism are banned. A few countries in the entire hemisphere with those policies. It is on social policy, not defending the regime, just saying, one of the most conservative countries in the entire
Wait. As a settled jihadi group behind October 7th as a political organization.
You can't claim that they're in Hamas while simultaneously claiming that Hamas is a group of jihadis. They're Islamic extremists, which they also claim constantly, which I don't know if that's true, by the way. It seems more like a political organization, but whatever it is, they're telling us constantly they're Al-Qaeda.
Tucker Carlson has attacked President Trump as a cover-up artist for sex trafficker Jeffrey Epstein on behalf of Israel and Mossad, making sure, of course, never to mention President Trump's name, because, of course, Tucker's a coward.
And moreover, it's extremely obvious to anyone who watches that this guy had direct connections to a foreign government. Now, no one's allowed to say that that foreign government is Israel because we have been somehow cowed into thinking that that's naughty. There is nothing wrong with saying that. There is nothing hateful about saying that.
Tucker Carlson has stated that President Trump has undermined America First and MAGA by attacking Iran, giving in to neocon ghouls like Mark Levin, while also idiotically arguing that President Trump striking Iran's nuclear facilities would lead to World War III. Spoiler alert, it didn't. Tucker Carlson also said in his interview with Nick Fuentes that the people he hates most in the entire world, more than ISIS, Al-Qaeda, Trans-Tifa, Marxists, rapists, murderers, are Christian Zionists who represent an enormous chunk of the conservative base. According to Tucker Carlson, who admits that he first read the Bible all the way through just 2 years ago, Christians who support a Jewish state of Israel are heretics and blasphemers with a brain virus.
How do you explain Mike Huckabee, Ted Cruz, and there are a lot like that, John Bolton. I mean, I've known them all, George W. Bush, like Karl Rove. I mean, all people I know personally who I've seen like be seized by this brain virus, and they're not Jewish. Most of them are self-described Christians, and then the Christian Zionists who are, well, Christian Zionists. Like, what is that?
Right.
And I could just say for myself, I dislike them more than anybody. Because like what? Because it's Christian heresy, and I'm offended by that as a Christian.
Tucker Carlson,
because it's Christian heresy, and I'm offended by that as a Christian.
Tucker Carlson has said that he despises American Jews who care about October 7th. We, in his words, don't care about America and also want to get his kids killed in a foreign war.
I've got 4 draft-age children. So if you're playing recklessly, fast and loose with their lives, then I have a right to despise you, and I do. So if you're Nikki Haley, who's running for president, or Ben Shapiro, or half the people I see on television casually mentioning the possibility of nuclear war or sending Americans to fight in the Middle East, or in any way involving us in a war that has nothing to do with prosperity and peace at home.
But most of all, Tucker Carlson acts as an ideological launderer for other people's evils. Tucker Carlson says many inflammatory things, always buying back just enough of it to appear as though he's not saying what he's clearly saying. He's a master of gaslighting. Tucker Carlson, for example, would never say out loud what Nick Fuentes does. He wouldn't say the things many of his guests say. And so instead, he acts as an ideological launderer. He takes other people's hideous ideas, he softens them, he treats them with love and care, and then he provides them with a massive signal boost. He isn't merely talking to people in good faith, of course. He's promoting certain people and ideas and attacking others. So, for example, he'll ask a series of wildly obsequious questions to Nick Fuentes. He'll even let Nick Fuentes' support for Joseph Stalin slide.
It's actually funny. It was December 18th. I remember because that's an important date to me. And it's Joseph Stalin's birthday.
Oh.
I'm a fan.
You're a fan of Stalin's?
Mm-hmm. Always an admirer. But we don't need to go into that, I guess.
Well, that's, okay, let's get back. We'll circle back to that.
Winston Churchill for World War II, and he will call him America's best and most honest historian.
I thought Churchill was the chief villain of the Second World War. Now, he didn't kill the most people. He didn't commit the most atrocities. But I believe, and I think when you really get into it and tell the story, right and don't leave anything out, you see that he was primarily responsible for that war becoming what it did, becoming something other than an invasion of Poland. You know, Germany, look, they put themselves into a position, and Adolf Hitler is chiefly responsible for this, but his whole regime is responsible for it, that when they went into the East in 1941, they launched a war where they were completely unprepared to deal with the millions and millions of prisoners of war, of local political prisoners and so forth that they were going to have to handle. They went in with no plan for that. And they just threw these people into camps, and millions of people ended up dead there.
And that is the pseudo-historian that Tucker Carlson has said is the best and most honest historian in America. Tucker Carlson will have on over and over a pro-Chinese propagandist who used global warming to promote global socialism, all in order to criticize Israel and hug China.
Israel has run American foreign policy in the Middle East for 30 years. That's how it works. This is actually the truth. If we drop our angst on big bad Russia, actually, we didn't have a chance to talk about it this time, maybe another time, big bad China, which is also not going to invade threaten us, not going to go to war with us. They got they're trying to deal with aging, and they've got their declining population and many other things. Not that they're falling apart. It's a very impressive civilization, but they're not a threat to the United States, honestly, and Iran is not a threat.
Tucker Carlson, of course, brings on pro-Hamas voices episode after episode after episode. The instances are almost limitless. Tucker Carlson will host Andrew Tate, a pornographer and scam artist who mocks rape victims and preaches a cult of narcissism and cruelty. And of course, Tucker Carlson will glorify him and present him as a maligned truth teller rather than an emblem of moral rot. See, this is how Tucker Carlson's ideological laundering works. You bring your dirty, ugly ideologies to Tucker Carlson's rhetorical car wash. He mixes it with some of the vestigial respect Americans have for him from his Fox News days, and voila, hideous ideas suddenly become mainstream. And then, of course, Tucker denies he said anything controversial at all. He was just asking questions. He was just interviewing people. You don't want him to cancel people, do you? Of course, there is no First Amendment right to a Tucker Carlson sensual massage. But to listen to Tucker, you'd think there was, so long as you despise America, oppose President Trump's foreign policy, and bear a peculiar dislike of Jews. Tucker Carlson, you see, is a coward. And here is where his relationship with Nick Fuentes begins. Well, Candace Owens had recently hosted Nick Fuentes, and this led Tucker Carlson, in an attempt to dissociate from Fuentes, to label him a weird little gay kid operating from a basement, and a Fed as well.
That's obvious to me. I've been around a long time. I know it when I see it.
Yeah. And I will say, I don't understand it. We were very kind to him. Like, I truly, like, we almost said, like, we felt maybe he was a bit lonely. We should invite him back for dinner. I mean, that's how good of an experience I had.
It's clearly, it's
and then it was a 180. So it's either A, it's being driven from like a little boy insecurity, and he just was so worried that he like just went on the attack because he doesn't know how to have normal relations after being banned everywhere.
Well, I think there's
that could be one element.
The angry gay kid thing going on. Yeah.
Well, Nick Fuentes did not take kindly to this. After all, here was Tucker Carlson, a man Nick Fuentes correctly sees as a fellow traveler, dismissing him, all the while refusing to say the sorts of things for which Fuentes takes slings and arrows. And so Fuentes unleashed on him as a fraud and also as an expert on gaslighting.
Tucker is like the GOAT of gaslighting. But unironically, he goes up at the memorial and said, Charlie Kirk told the truth. You know who else told the truth? Jesus. And you know what happened? He got killed by Jews. And people said, so are you saying that the Jews killed Charlie Kirk in the way that they killed Jesus for telling the truth because they hate the truth? And Tucker said, I never said that. You're crazy. I never said that. Everyone eats hummus. What do you mean? Everyone runs Jerusalem.
100th time. He can do what he likes. This is America. But there's no question that Tucker has become the most virulent super spreader of vile ideas in America. And the rest of us who oppose those vile ideas have every right to call him that. There's one other element here that's even darker, if possible. Tucker Carlson preys on the friendship he proclaims with others. And then he knifes them directly between the shoulder blades when convenient for him. Tucker Carlson is, in short, a terrible friend. Tucker Carlson was supposedly Charlie Kirk's friend. Charlie believed that Nick Fuentes was vermin. That's a direct quote. He believed that because Nick Fuentes dedicated his life to destroying Charlie Kirk, eating nefarious Jews, killed Charlie, with no mention of the ideology of the actual alleged murderer, who was, of course, a trans activist gay furry. Tucker Carlson, in fact, has spent more time talking about Jews and Israel since Charlie's death than about the Transtifa ideology that motivated Charlie Kirk's killer. By a long shot, it's not close, which is not a surprise, since he seems to spend very little time these days attacking anyone on the left. Well, now Tucker Carlson has seen fit to launder Nick Fuentes, the person who hated Charlie most and who wished him destruction. That's not an act of friendship, it's an act of sick evil. And then, of course, there's Tucker Carlson's relationship with the vice president. Certainly, Vice President Vance has been quite generous with Tucker Carlson. That loyalty was not reciprocated last week, to say the least. Here, for example, is what Nick Fuentes has said about J.D. Vance's wife, Usha.
Andrew Tate and Bronze Age pervert and all these people, for years, all they talk about is going to the gym, being a vitalist, fighting the Matrix, India smells bad, all this kind of shit. And now they're all in favor of a fat race mixer who's married to a Jeet who named his son Vivek, who was mentored by a Jewish neocon and a gay fed, Peter Thiel. This guy has a non-white wife and a kid named Vivek. This guy is going to be a defender of white identity? I don't think so. This guy's going to defend American identity?
Finally, brings us to the Heritage Foundation. Now, I have a long and admiring relationship with the Heritage Foundation. One of the very first outlets to pick up my syndicated column when I was 17 years old, 24 years ago, was townhall.com, then a property of the Heritage Foundation. I know most of the leadership very well, and I have for decades. I know Kevin Roberts, and I like him, and I'm grateful for his contributions to the conservative movement. If you're a regular watcher of this show, you can check the interview I did with Kevin on the release of his book just last December. Which is why what Kevin Roberts did last week is tragic and awful. He put out a statement that Heritage Foundation didn't just stand by Tucker Carlson. Kevin instead said openly and repeatedly that Tucker Carlson can do nothing, ever, that will sever his relationship with the conservative movement. He said that after and in defense of Tucker's glossing of Hitler defender Nick Fuentes. And he added that only members of the globalist class, direct quote, a venomous coalition, direct quote, subject to the dictates of someone else's agenda, direct quote, oppose Heritage's ongoing relationship with Tucker Carlson, which means that according to Kevin Roberts, apparently, anyone opposing the ongoing mainstreaming of Tucker Carlson is acting on behalf of a foreign power. Kevin's statement is a betrayal of the Heritage Foundation's history and principles, which is presumably why both Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes loved it. And that's a tragedy, because America needs a robust conservative organization based on principle and ideas, not personal loyalty to bad actors like Tucker Carlson. We need strong leaders in the conservative movement willing to speak out against the moral rot that threatens our future. I hope Kevin Roberts and Heritage show us that they can still be those leaders. But if not, we'll have to look elsewhere. So, why is all of this happening? Because, like the Democratic Party, the Republican Party is being eaten by its radicals. Many in the political class are too cowardly to stand up. Apparently, they're willing to play footsie with groypers and hug Tucker Carlson out of fear of somehow losing support. They've been bamboozled by the lies of the X algorithm and the TikTok metrics. The left followed its radicals to electoral hell. Apparently, many on the right wish to do the same. Forget the morality then for just a moment. Let's be pragmatic. Here is the thing. Americans hate Nick Fuentes' philosophy. They think it's trash. Republicans, by the polling, think it's trash. Independents think it's trash. Democrats think it's trash. And here's the other thing. Americans hate Tucker Carlson's laundered anti-Americanism. Republicans think it's trash. Independents think it's trash. Democrats think it's trash. Americans are not pro-segregation, pro-rape, anti-woman, pro-child marriage, anti-black, anti-Jew, anti-Indian, anti-Latino, anti-Constitution, pro-Hitler nutjobs like Nick Fuentes. And Americans are not pro-Putin, pro-Iran, pro-China, pro-Venezuela, pro-Hamas, pro-Fuentes, pro-Tate idiots like Tucker Carlson. They hate this vile garbage. If Republicans decide to cower before the likes of neo-Nazis and their propagandizers, they deserve to lose. And they will lose. Neo-Nazis and their propagandizers are not Republicans. They are not America First. They are not MAGA. They sure as hell aren't conservative. These people aren't to my right. They are not attached in any way to the fundamental principles of conservatism. And these people have already declared themselves to be my enemies. I'd be a fool not to take them seriously. If they get their way, they will hollow out the Republican Party, lead it to electoral catastrophe, and empty it and the country of any semblance of decency in the process. My answer is no. No to the groypers. No to their publicists like Tucker Carlson. No to those who champion them. No to demoralization. No to bigotry and anti-meritocratic horse shit. No to anti-Americanism. No. This is our country. This is our party. And this is our conservative movement. And I will not stand by while it is handed over to those who betray the most fundamental principles I have spent my entire life defending and advocating. That is a path to defeat and a path to moral oblivion. I reject it because if we lose the right, we will lose to the left. And either way, we'll lose the country. I'm Ben Shapiro. This is The Ben Shapiro Show.
That might have gone a little bit longer than I expected to show you more, but I really felt it was worth seeing, especially for those of you that have not seen it or had a chance to find it. It's quite a mess that the right has going on right now, and they're going to have to solve it. And I don't think it's going to be solved very easily. And as I said, I don't know if by Friday Kevin Roberts is going to be at Heritage anymore, because Heritage has got necessary to save himself by cutting Tucker loose. So we'll see. And then we'll see what else happens on the right and who else is going to start to eat each other here, because this is just the beginning. This really is. And it happens to be right at the same time as the Democrats tonight have elected Mondani, the socialist, a Democratic socialist who MSNBC and CNN, especially MSNBC, seem to be celebrating, which I find nauseating because, again, it just like the right is awful on these things. Socialism is not the answer on the left. And it's going to move the Democrats further to the left. And it's not going to allow the center, which is the majority of the people, to find a home, because they're not going to like what's offered by the Democrats. And, there's a problem. I think a lot of people are starting to feel very homeless between the two parties and what's going on. And it's unfortunate that we can't have other parties, because I do think now more than any time ever in history we could have a third party that the center could occupy. But that being as it may, it's an exciting time to be alive, and certainly an exciting week. And you'll be seeing more of me. Thank you very much. Please like, subscribe, and share this video. It really helps when you subscribe and like with the algorithm at YouTube for them to show my videos and for me to get new followers. And the more followers I get, the more distribution I get. And I hit a number and I seem to be stalled there, and I'd like to expand it again. And with your help, I will get there. And I appreciate your support. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.